Hey, shalom, shalom, shalom lakam, which is peace unto you all. Hi, Rob Tawab la atham za'ach yakam yawam on Chagadol Charlotte, which is good evening. This is your brother Yawam from the JMS camp in Charlotte. Nachamatam kaya hamalakat hashemayim kwara repent ye for the kingdom of heaven is at hand. Call halayim la la b'nawa Yahweh b'hasham Yahweh shai b'hasham rocha kodash wamashana la zakonim na wamala akim shor Chagadol, which is our praises to our Father Yahweh, which means He exists. Bahasham, in the name Yahweh Shai that lives in double honors to the elders and apostles of our great millstone. Zayashaya, this is Isaiah chapter 19 and verse 1. And it says, the burden of Egypt. Behold, the Lord rideth upon a swift cloud, and shall come into Egypt, and the idols of Egypt shall be moved at his presence, and the heart of Egypt shall melt in the midst of it. All right, now pretty much what I wanted to go into in this lesson is, pretty much, the idols of Egypt are being moved, all right, from, so-called Christianity, different religions. All right, people, they confide in their cars. All right, the Lord is making it to where cars are super hard to be assessed. People can't obtain cars. The used car market is pretty much it's not as lucrative, and it's not as used cars aren't as cheap as they once was. So the Lord is making it ultimately due to prophecy. To where, things are super inaccessible, all right? And cars, things that people confide in is just one of them, religions, all right? Money, people confide in their money, the Lord's removing the jobs, all right? Because there's no work for Egypt, as it mentions in the same chapter. So I just want to go into that, because the idols of Egypt are being moved. All right, so reading it again, verse 1. It says the burden of Egypt, and which is word for burden, all right, it's the Hebrew. All right, that word for burden, it says mash'ah, all right? And it says a load, tribute, burden, lifting. It says uplifting that to which the soul lifts itself up. Or it says an utterance, oracle, burden. Or it says a burden, specifically, tribute, or abstractly, porterage, figuratively, and utterance, chiefly a doom. So it's chiefly a doom upon America, Babylon the Great. All right, because the Lord is a just power. So the Lord is going to give America, Babylon, a great just reward. All right, that's why the scriptures call this place Maratayam, which goes into double rebellion. So for the double rebellion, all right, America, Babylon, the Great, also likened unto spiritual Egypt, is going to receive double, for her works. Roughly paraphrasing. All right, and that goes into that burden. All right, that doom, that utterance against this place. You see, because of the atrocities and the exception of this place. All right, it says, behold, the Lord rideth upon a swift cloud, and shall come into Egypt, and the idols of Egypt shall be moved at his presence. All right, and the Lord Yahweh is dispatching his son Yahweh Shai upon the father's ship. All right, and ultimately, the hegemony of Esau, Edom, all right, chiefly America, Babylon the Great, and other different parts of the globe, you see, but chiefly Babylon, all right, is going to receive of a ultimate destruction. It says, and shall come into Egypt, and the idols of Egypt shall be moved at his presence. And ultimately, the idols of Egypt are being moved. All right, from those that entrusted in the economy, all right, those that trusted in these degrees, all right, those that trusted in the money, those that trusted in feminism, because feminism was a very key component in the idols that was founded. Pretty much one of the foundational idols in America, Babylon the Great. Feminism. All right, putting the woman before the man. That goes into pretty much the Queen of Heaven worship. All right, Ishtar. So the things that people once confided in, those things are being moved out of the way due to prophecy. Because the Lord Yahweh Shai's spirit is moving out amongst the planet Earth. All right, so I'm gonna keep going to verse 2. It says, and I will set the Egyptians against the Egyptians, and they shall fight everyone against his brother and everyone against his neighbor, city against city, and kingdom against kingdom. All right, and another idol that was that was heavily pushed in this place, America, was that whole community thing, that melting pot, everybody be as one people. All right, you see, but the Lord ultimately is removing that. That's why, these Babylonians are ultimately at each other's necks. All right, people, not too long ago, someone got offed. All right, they got deleted, you see, because they made, a sandwich the incorrect way at Subway. They didn't put mayonnaise up there. So the love of many is waxing cold, you see, but then that conglomerate type of spirit that was in America that made this place a melting pot, ultimately the Lord is removing that to where, pretty much it's a lot of infighting, civil war, civil unrest. All right, so let's get this. Let's get Psalms chapter 97. All right, we'll get verse 7, and it says, confounded be all they that serve graven images, that boast themselves of idols, worship him all ye powers. All right. And it says confounded, and this word is bawash. It says to put to shame, be ashamed, be disconcerted, be disappointed, to feel shame. You see, so those that confided in JC, you know, in these times now, they don't have anything to show for. They don't have any faith, so to speak, to show for. They don't have anything to ultimately hide behind. All right, because what's happening is, I'm gonna get this precept real fast. This is give me a second. This is Proverbs 21 and 29. It says, a wicked man hardeneth his face, but as for the upright, he directeth his way. All right, NLT. It says, NLT, Proverbs 21 and 29, the wicked bluff their way through, but the virtuous think before they act. So because, and this also plays into Ecclesiastes, the 8th chapter. All right, but because, you know, people have this period of time to where, you know, it seems like the prophecies is happening and then, you know, it slows down, you know, 2/3 are in those of the world, you know, ultimately they're able to hide behind, you know, the mask and the, you know, the guises that they pretty much receive, or the false covering that they receive of from following these different ways of life. All right, whether they confide behind the money, the economy, all right, feminism, so on and so forth. All right, but being that the Lord is pretty much removing those things out of the way, and prophecy is manifest. All right, the end is manifest. You know, so they can no longer, you know, 2/3 the heathen, they can no longer hide behind that bluff. All right, they really don't know what's going on, and that's why it goes into, when we went in Psalms the 97th chapter, it went into to be ashamed, because really those that confide in JC, those that go into so-called Christianity, Islam, so on and so forth, they really ashamed, you know, because they don't have that stability. Whereas, you know, us in this truth, are we in that spirit of Isaiah 60, the 65th chapter? You know, we're rejoicing as the Lord is doing that role reversal. Are we in Isaiah 33 and verse 6? You know, wisdom and knowledge shall be the stability of thy times, and strength of salvation. The fear of the Lord is his treasure. You know, so we have the fear of the Lord, and that's keeping us stable in these times. You know, those of the world, those you know, the heathen, they was able, you know, to hide behind all of those you know, those idols, you see, but all of that is being removed, and, you know, right now they're in a very ashamed type of a state. They don't have any answers. All right, so let's also get this. Let's get Jeremiah, Yaramyah, chapter 50, and we'll get verse 2, and it says, verse 1, the word that the Lord spake against Babylon and against the land of the Chaldeans by Jeremiah the prophet. Declare ye among the nations, and publish and set up a standard. All right, it says, publish and conceal not. Say, Babylon is taken, Bel is confounded, Merodach is broken in pieces. Her idols are confounded, and her images are broken in pieces. And ultimately, that shows, you know, that these, you know, idols don't have any power. You know, they don't have any power, and those that ultimately follow after these places, those that ultimately follow after these ways of life, they ultimately confound it, and, you know, they're powerless. All right, let's get this. This is 1 Samuel chapter 5, and we'll get verse 1. And it says, and the Philistines took the ark of the Most High and brought it from Ebenezer unto Ashdod. When the Philistines took the ark of the Most High, they brought it into the house of Dagon and set it by Dagon. And when they of Ashdod arose early on the morrow, behold, Dagon was fallen upon his face to the earth before the ark of the Lord. And they took Dagon and set him in his place again. And when they arose early on the morrow morning, behold, Dagon was fallen upon his face to the ground before the ark of the Lord, and the head of Dagon and both the palms of his, and the head of Dagon and both the palms of his hands were cut off upon the threshold. Only the stump of Dagon was left to him. It says, therefore, neither the priests of Dagon nor any that come into Dagon's house tread on the threshold of Dagon and Ashdod unto this day. All right, let's get this right here in the NLT. 1 Samuel 5 and 4, it says, but in the NLT, it says, but the next morning the same thing happened. Dagon had fallen face down before the ark of the Lord again. This time his head and his hands had broken off and were lying in the doorway. Only the trunk of his body was left intact. All right, and your hands, your palms, that represents your power. So this ultimately, because the Lord speaks in signs, all right, and that's a sign that, you know, these idols, all right, these off doctrines, all right, pretty much, you know, again, going into, you know, the idols, pretty much they powerless. All right, you know, a idol with no hands, all right, it don't have, you know, it don't have any power. All right, and then also scripture going to in Habakkuk, the 2nd chapter, It goes into, I'm gonna get it real fast. This is because the head of the idol Dagon, it fell off. All right, I'm read this again. 1 Samuel 5:4 says, and when they arose early on the morrow morning, behold, Dagon was fallen upon his face to the ground before the ark of the Lord, and the head of Dagon and both palms of his hands were cut off upon the threshold. Only the stump of Dagon was left to him. All right, so just the torso. All right, yep, CSB, just the torso. So showing that something without any hands, any palms, all right, it's powerless. All right, and then the head, there's no understanding in it. All right, this is Habakkuk chapter 2, and we'll get verse 18. And it says, what profiteth the graven image, that the maker thereof have graven it? The molten image and the teacher of lies, that that the maker of his work trusted therein to make dumb idols. All right, because ultimately, these altered ways of life and all philosophies, all right, they're not ultimately speaking, because when something is dumb, it means it's not speaking, so the scriptures speak. All right, it's a living word, whereas these different doctrines, and the books of those doctrines, all right, really is just stuff that sound good. All right, as we're going to get into Adon Artazah. Verse 19, it says, woe unto him that saith to the wood, awake, to the dumb stone, arise, and shall teach. Behold, it is laid over with gold and silver, and there is no breath at all in the and there is no breath at all in the midst of it. All right, so destruction to those that ultimately trust, all right, in a piece of wood. All right, that's so-called Christianity. All right, and those that ultimately trust in a stone. All right, that goes into Islam. All right, it says it is laid over with gold and silver, so these things look good, all right, but it's not ultimately good. It's not beneficial to, to Jake, all right. It says, and there is no breath at all in the midst of it, so being that, the idol Dagon's head was falling off, all right, it showed, the hands was broken off, all right, so it's powerless, all right, but then it's no understanding, because the breath ultimately represents understanding, all right, whereas the scriptures give us wisdom, knowledge, and understanding, and it ultimately provides forth for true stabilization. Whereas those that, 2/3, they ultimately didn't want to choose the fear of the Lord, so they have to abide in that false covering, but we're coming into the time, or we are in the time, which is only going to increase, but we're in the time to where, people are pretty much finding out that, whatever it was that they confided in, it was worthless, all right, it was powerless, all right, and it's the Lord Yahweh Bahasham Yahweh Shai ultimately bringing forth judgments, all right, in the planet Earth, So just wanted to go into that. Adon Artazah Banayapa. Lord's will, that was a beautiful edification to the spirit. Adon Artazah Adam Yeshlai Latawab. Lord's will, you have a good night. Wa shalom lakam, which is peace unto you all. Shalom, shalom.